Good afternoon, everyone. At the end of the lecture last week, someone asked the question, how is it that a series of lectures on science is being given in a church? Well, the short answer to that is that religion and science belong together. And if they do not belong together, there's something wrong with religion. And that's illustrated by the fact that the opening chapters of the Bible are all taken up with the very issues I've been discussing in the last 3 lectures. But someone might say, yes, but isn't that religion? That's not science. No, it's not science as we understand science, but it is science as science was understood 2,500 years ago. And the common belief that science and religion are in conflict should actually be seen as a conflict between modern science and ancient science. Now, the ancient science actually had quite a bit to be said for it, even though it is now mostly outmoded. But as I shall show presently, there are some aspects of the science in the early part of the Bible which are just as true today as they were then. Now let me start with this picture. You'll all have seen a picture that Michelangelo painted on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. It is the creation of man by God. Now that is not a biblical picture. And in fact, it conflicts with the Bible on 2 main issues. First is that the Bible is insistent that no one should ever attempt to depict God. Well, Michelangelo did it. And the second thing is that the way in which he depicted the creation of humankind is also in conflict with the Bible. And consequently, it's not at all biblical. Now, this is what the Bible says. The Lord formed man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living being. Now that is in conflict with what became Christian doctrine, because Christian doctrine drew its understanding of creation from Plato and regarded man as an embodied soul. Notice the difference, an embodied soul. That's not the biblical view. The biblical view is that man is an animated body, animated for the time between conception and death. So that is why God is said to have spoken to the first man, "You are dust, and unto dust you shall return." And that's as true today as it was then. But our being made from dust was not in one moment of time 6,000 years ago, as the Bible suggests. Our being made from dust is a very long story, because we humans have evolved from a bacterium 3.5 billion years ago. And that is the story that I have been attempting to unfold in these lectures. It is a truly amazing and breathtaking story. And we're now going to take up that story at the point in time where we left it in the last lecture. In the last lecture, we took the story of the evolution of life from the bacterium to the dinosaurs, and then came a great calamity on the earth which brought about the demise of the dinosaurs. Now, here's a picture of Earth's time, particularly for those who haven't seen it before. The Earth started with a Hadean, a hellish period. It moved into the Archean period, which was when bacteria first began to emerge. Still a mystery. And in the Proterozoic period, then more complex forms of organisms began to evolve. But the period of real life is only in the last 500 million years, the Phanerozoic there at the end. And it was during the Phanerozoic period that there were 5 mass extinctions, 2 of them very severe indeed, and one of them, of course, we ended with at the last lecture. Now, life has been remarkably resilient. Even though there have been these great disasters to life, each was followed first by a slow recovery and then by a massive expansion of life. It's as if life, once it is here, cannot be put down. It keeps coming to life again in fuller and different forms. Now, the biodiversity has changed over the years, particularly in the Phanerozoic period, simply because of these massive extinctions. And this particular chart attempts to show, in these yellow periods, the 5 mass extinctions. And, of course, this one here was known as the Great Dying, in which life almost went out altogether, while the next one brought about the end of the dinosaurs. Notice that this chart regards biodiversity as the essence of the evolution of life. That is, it keeps evolving into more and more diverse forms, which is good, of course, for life. We are now facing, right at the end of this period, the fact that biodiversity is actually decreasing because of human action. But even before the period of the Great Dying, the tetrapods, they were the form of life on the earth which took place after some of the fishes ventured onto the land and used their fins to become legs. And after quite a long time, we're dealing with millions and millions of years here, they divided into 2 main groups. First of all came the sauropsids. Now, the sauropsids flourished as reptiles, of which the dinosaurs were the chief. But they also flourished as the birds, which evolved out of the sauropsids. Now, the other main group is known as the synapsids, and this is the group that eventually was to produce the mammals and us. So the Great Dying actually provided a vacuum, as it were, in the life forces for the sauropsids to flourish, and so that is why the Mesozoic period became the age of the dinosaurs. But then a group of the most advanced synapsids during that period, called therapsids, they rather looked like the reptiles that became the dinosaurs, and yet it's from them that the actual mammals began to evolve. 120 million years ago, even the mammals divided, and this, of course, is before the great extinction we ended the last lecture with. So already there were changes taking place which were to flourish in the later period. And the mammals divided into the marsupials, of which the kangaroo is the most well known, but there are many, 100 varieties or more. They're mostly in Australia and surrounding islands. That was one division of the mammals. The other division, of course, are called the placentals, because the placentals have a longer period within the womb before birth. As you all know, the marsupials, the little baby kangaroo, is born at a very tiny stage, climbs up its mother's fur into the pouch, where there it is fed by its mother thereafter. But the placentals, they have a longer period of gestation, which means that when they are born, they are, as it were, much more helpless and have to depend much more upon the motherly love that comes to them. And among the placentals, of course, is the mouse or the rat, actually quite a close relative to us. Now we come to the demise of the dinosaurs. Just as the earlier great dying gave space for the reptiles, so the second great disaster provided a vacuum in biological life for the mammals, now to flourish and to diversify. The placentals alone diversified into 4,000 species, from the bat to the whale. They are all mammals. And so the period that we're in now, the Cenozoic period, can be known as the age of the mammals, whereas the earlier period was the age of the fish, followed by the age of the dinosaurs or the reptiles. Now, how do the placentals actually break up? Well, of course, this is only a small number of the ones of the 4,000 species. There are the rodents and the rabbits and the elephants, not to mention the whales and the bats. But we're particularly concerned with what became known as the primates. They were called primates because those who gave this title thought these were the sort of cream of life, right at the tops. And we still, of course, tend to think of ourselves that way. Now, the primates began also to divide. And I'm taking this to show how various types of primates which still exist, of course there are some that didn't exist to present days, broke away from the hominids at various stages. Richard Dawkins has a wonderful book, it's about 500 or 600 pages long, which traces this in reverse. He goes backward until we find a common ancestor, to a common ancestor, to a common ancestor. And some of this I've drawn from Richard Dawkins' book. It's called The Ancestor's Tale. Now, the lemurs, who are found only in Madagascar, broke away from the main line 60 million years ago, and perhaps have not changed a great deal in all that time. There they are. The next were the New World monkeys, 40 million years ago. Just think of the time, 20 million years between them. I mean, we've got no idea of a million years, let alone 20 million years. And so the New World monkeys, as they're called, the spider monkey is a good example, we had a common ancestor with them up until 40 million years ago. By the way, you'll notice those of you who've been to the other lectures, that the first 3 lectures I was always talking about billions of years. Well, we've at least increased it now to millions of years. You see, 1 billion years is 1,000 million years. Now we're talking about million years. By the end of this lecture, we're going to talk about tens of thousands of years. And then there are the old world monkeys among the primates, and we had a common ancestor with them until about 25 million years ago, and the baboon is a good example of the old world monkeys. But that line with the arrow going down is meant to mean it's still another group of primates known as the great apes. Now, the great apes, there are 5 main divisions in the great apes, and we're going to see now how they became separated from one another. There are the gibbons on the left, and then come the hominids, noted as human there, then the chimpanzees, the gorillas, and the orangutans. They're all recognized as being much closer to us than any other animal species. Now, the gibbon, with whom we had a common ancestry until about 18 million years ago, followed by the orangutan. People go to see the orangutan now in the islands off New Guinea. We had a common ancestry with them until 14,000 years ago. And as you go through these, keep your eye on the form, because you'll find that they're getting closer and closer to what a human being looks like. The gorilla, with whom we had a common ancestry until 7 million years ago. And finally, the chimpanzee. The chimpanzee is our nearest living relative. We had a common ancestor up until about 6 million years ago. Now, here's a summary of the primates as a whole, just to show the distances in time in which we forked out and began to move in different directions. The lemurs, 60 million years ago. The New World monkeys, 40 million years ago. The Old World monkeys, 25 million years ago, by which time the rest didn't have a tail. The gibbons, 18 million years ago. The orangutans, 14 million years ago. The gorillas, 8 million years ago. The chimpanzees, 6, which leaves the rest as the hominids, a word, of course, which is now getting closer to what it means to be a human being. Now, the hominids have also diversified only in the last 6 million years. That's a very short time compared with cosmological time, but still a very long time, 6 million years. You see, all that we can get our minds around is about 2,000 years at the beginning of the Christian period, and we know quite a bit about the history both before and after that. But when you move from that to 1 million years, to 6 million years, we can't really grasp that nearly so easily. And during this period, the hominids now diversified. It is thought perhaps up to about 20 different species. Now, one of these was the Australopithecus africanus. I don't know why they give them such difficult terms. And indeed, a very important one who lived about 3 million years ago in Africa is now known as Lucy, and she is the one it is thought that we are all descended from. Now, when you look at Australopithecus africanus, you can begin to see the shape, because this is made up from the skull that has been found. You begin to see the shape, our shape of face, beginning to emerge. And it is thought, particularly because of Lucy, that this particular hominid was the ancestor of a very important genus, the genus Homo, of which, of course, also we shall see there were various varieties. But during the last ice age, roughly from 2.5 million years ago until, the genus Homo also diversified. That is what life is always doing. It is diversifying and branching out all the time, trying new areas, some of which have a full stop because they don't survive, and others which are successful. Now, this map is intended to show how out of Africa various forms of the hominids, and indeed now of the Homo genus, moved out. Some into Europe, into Asia, into America. Homo ergaster is one of the earliest, also sometimes identified with Homo erectus. Let me say that science at this stage is still in a very much of an unfinished state. All we can go on are the various fossils and bones that have been discovered, and on the basis of those, scientists attempt to put them all into some degree of order. And there is as yet no agreed upon order that we can fit all of them in. What I'm doing in this lecture is to pick out the more important ones and say something about them. But first of all, let us look at where we've come from. First of all, there were the primates. Now, there was only one group which led to the great apes, but there are other forms that still exist. Of the great apes, there were many kinds, only one which led to the hominids. Then of the hominids, only one which led to the genus Homo. And of the genus Homo, only one, us, survived, as it were. Now, Homo habilis is so named because he had learned to use very simple tools. Indeed, the word habilis really means handyman Homo. Notice his face too. He used primitive stone tools, but he was very different from us in some respects. He was quite short, he had very long arms, as of course the earlier forms of the apes often did compared with humans, because they were used to living in trees and needed the long arms to grasp the branches. Then comes Homo erectus, so called because he was thought to be the first to actually stand upright and walk on two legs. But it is thought that Homo habilis, and indeed it is even thought that the earlier one, Australopithecus, also walked on two legs and has left footprints behind to show it. Now, learning to walk on two legs was extremely important because it then freed the arms to do a whole lot of other things, such as carry things and also to look after their young more easily. Homo erectus is regarded as being the ancestor of three other kinds that have been discovered: Homo heidelbergensis, Homo neanderthalis, which we usually call the Neanderthal man, and of course Homo sapiens. So we may have come down from a line from Australopithecus through Homo erectus to Homo sapiens. Homo heidelbergensis is beginning to look more like the caveman. He seems to have diverged from Homo neanderthalis. And indeed, he was not so robust as later human beings. He had a smaller brain, somewhere between 35% and 50% of our brain capacity. And he is the first species that we know of who took the trouble to bury their dead. Homo neanderthalis had a different kind of life, and indeed flourished for 200,000 years in Europe. No examples of Neanderthalis have been found south of Gibraltar. And indeed, Neanderthalis was able to withstand the Ice Age when it arrived. So that means that Neanderthal man was not quite as dumb as we often think him to be. Indeed, it's known that he had a larger brain capacity than we have, though he may not have used it quite as well as we do. But he had something to work with. But Neanderthals died out 30,000 years ago, which leaves, of course, only Homo sapiens. We came out of Africa about 200,000 years ago, as Neanderthals had come out of Africa earlier than that in order to settle into Europe. It is as there were waves of successive forms of the Homo genius coming out of Africa and moving around the world as far as it was possible for them to go. And this is the form, this is the point at which we really reached the physical form or shape we have now, somewhere between 100,000 to 50,000 years ago. But then, one more disaster. In 70,000 years ago, there was a big blowout in Indonesia. And a great mountain, Mount Toba, blew its top off and left this lake. Much the same as Mount Tarawera did within living memory, except that this was much bigger. And it caused a kind of night which lasted for 6 to 10 years, which of course was detrimental to all higher forms of life, particularly the genus Homo. Some have suggested that human population was so reduced that there were only about 1,000 breeding pairs left. I suspect that's perhaps a little extreme, but you see, it shows how we only made it by the skin of our teeth. Not only were there the earlier great reductions of life, but this is one which nearly finished humankind. So let's go back to the map that I showed you earlier. Have you noticed the difference between this and what I showed you earlier? In other words, there are surviving primates, there are surviving great apes, there are no other hominids or genus Homo except ourselves. And that has opened up the gap between the human species and all other species living on the planet. So we are the only surviving hominid, as well as being the only surviving species of the genus Homo. Now, of all the animals, mammals, primates, hominids, apes, genus Homo. What is it that makes us human? It's not the ability to communicate. Most animals and birds have their own ways of communication. It's not even the ability to think. One can find lots of examples to show that animals and birds think. It's the ability to speak. We are speaking apes. That's what makes us different from all the other members of the ape family. And for that reason, one can regard the emergence of language as a very significant point in the whole evolutionary story. You see, let's go back and look at the story as a whole, recapping from the beginning. First of all, there was the Big Bang, and that led to the formation of the galaxies, and that led to the formation of the planet Earth, and that led to the emergence of life, and that led to mammals, and that led to the genus Homo. But now we find a very odd thing. It led to human language, and the Bible put language first. It put language first, as we go back to the story, as God said. It was language which brought the world into being. Now, why did they say that? They weren't quite as foolish as you might think they were. There was a very good reason why they said that. And so they said, God had only to speak, let there be light, let there be a firmament, let there be lights in the sky, let there be fishes and birds, let there be land animals, and let us make mankind in our own image. Even St. John's Gospel starts, in the beginning was the Word. Now, why did they think language came first? There's a very good reason for it. And it's this. From our earliest memories, we are immersed in language. We cannot remember a time when people were not speaking and we were not speaking. And so language appeared to be there from not only their beginning, but from the beginning. And it played an extremely important role. We wouldn't get very far without language. We live in an ocean of language as fish live in an ocean of water. It's worth remembering that and pausing to dwell on that, to realize how much we depend upon it. What is more, we humans created language. Now, we didn't create our bodies, they've evolved. But slowly and over a long period, we created language. But language has also helped to shape us. So we can say that human language and the human species have evolved in tandem. And we've been evolving like this for roughly 50,000 years. So when did language begin? Well, at this point I thought the best place to go is to the linguistics department up at Victoria University. So I did. And they immediately put me on to something of the answer. They put me on to this man. Now this man lives in Auckland. He's a retired professor of psychology. Not a linguistic man at all. But his 2 books on the origin of language I found simply fascinating. One of them, and the man himself is called Michael Corbelis. He was down recently at the Readers and Writers Week here. He called From Hand to Mouth, the Origins of Language. Now his main thesis in this book is, Of course, language is a form of communication, but it started with gestures. Manual gestures, facial gestures. And that reminds us how much we depend upon gestures to this day. We can hardly say anything without using our hands. We talk about body language, and our facial expressions, of course, often give us away much more than we would like them to be, because all our emotions are expressed in our facial expressions. Now, he said, Michael Corbett said, it all started with gestures, which is the reason why we still use gestures today. But whereas for us today, gestures are a means of helping when we can't quite get the words, previously it was speech which was helping gestures. And the arrival of speech was very important because it freed the hands to do other things. And the speech, no doubt, evolved out of simply the cries and grunts which all the higher animals do, but cries and grunts which were used purposefully. But speech now frees up the hands to do more. Now, speech is a very complex activity. We should have a lot more sympathy with little children learning to speak. Their minds, their brains are working furiously during those first 6 months to 3 years, trying to grasp and then put into operation all the things that need to be done simply to say a few words. Because it consists of manipulating sounds. Sounds which come from the larynx, but then are manipulated by the tongue and lips. That's why we call it language, from the tongue. Now, to do this, there are two things that are needed. First of all, there's the necessary form of larynx, what's known as a descended larynx, or our vocal cords, if you like. They're only found in Homo sapiens. That's a remarkable thing. Then, secondly, it requires an enlarged brain. So the earlier forms of Homo not only could never speak, because they didn't have the larynx, neither did they have the brain. What is more, it needs in the brain a special area, which is known as the Broca's area. And it's not found in chimpanzees, our nearest relative. So in this sense, we are quite unique in having the facilities to evolve language as we have. Now, the larynx began to lengthen about 2 million years ago, but only reached the present length and the necessary length about 200,000 years ago. So it's only after that time that it was possible for language to develop. So the earlier species of Homo just could not speak. They probably developed a proto-language of communication which consisted of gestures and cries. Now, Homo sapiens not only created language, but it's the most important tool we have ever created. It's helped to make us what we are. It cannot be overemphasized. Language uses vocal sounds to be the symbolic bearers of meaning. That is why in different languages the same object is spoken of in quite different set of sounds. You see, only a few words are onomatopoeic, that is, they reflect the kind of meaning we want to give them, such as shush. But most words are not of that kind. They have developed as a set of sounds, as symbols of meaning. So with language, we are consciously constructing a world for ourselves which is full of meaning. which is once again the reason why the early biblical writers spoke of language as that which created the world. They do create the world. The world we live in, the world we know, the world we're familiar with, has been created by language. And that's why we know it and can speak of it. Now, Teilhard de Chardin called this event, the emergence of language, the noosphere. And he did that because, looking back now to the whole process of evolution and retracing some of our own steps, the barysphere, the centre of the earth, out on which there is the asthenosphere, the rather semi-fluid bit upon which the tectonic plates move, the lithosphere, and then on the lithosphere, the hydrosphere, the ocean, and then over the ocean, the atmosphere, and then in the atmosphere and on the lithosphere, the biosphere that has emerged after all the rest. On top of them all comes the noosphere, the sphere of knowing, the sphere of knowledge, which collects together, from which we draw as we grow older, and to which we contribute our little bit in the course of time. Now, Karl Popper, the famous philosopher of science, called this world of thinking, this world of thought, World 3. And he did it because he found it was necessary in order to understand ourselves in relation to the world, to build a model which goes like this. Now, the physical world, which I've been talking about through all these lectures, is for him World 1. But World 1 has brought forth conscious life. And so that leads to consciousness. And we're dealing here with human consciousness. And that he called World 2. But human consciousness has produced another kind of world, the world of human thought and knowledge, which of course we're born into. We call it our culture, and which in turn shapes us to be the kind of people we are. And that Popper called World 3. But it doesn't stop there, because as this has grown and developed, it changes our consciousness and our awareness and our ability to think. And in the end, of course, it affects the physical world as we become more and more able to change the physical world. Now, this noosphere, as Teilhard called it, the world of human thought, on the basis of language, which is its tool, by which it constructs the various elements of the noosphere, it constructs stories. It constructs everything in religious knowledge or religious understanding, philosophy, the sciences, the rituals and the ethics by which we live. It's all in World 3, or the noosphere. Now, this in turn has evolved. It's all part of the evolutionary process, but it's only been evolving roughly in the last 50,000 years. At this point, I just want to say, as we get to the end, I'm writing a book from which these lectures have been drawn. The book is tentatively entitled The Self-Evolving Universe. The subtitle you may be interested in, How the World Made Us and How We Made God. It's in two parts. You've been hearing only from Part 1. So to finish off, the universe has evolved over 13,750,000,000 years. Life on this planet has evolved over 3 million years. Human consciousness has been evolving over perhaps 2 million years. The world of human thought has evolved over 50,000 years only, and they are all still evolving. And that's the story of evolution. Thank you.